So in this video, I'll show you how to start your analysis in NVivo15 or any other version of NVivo up to NVivo15, which is a qualitative data analysis software. So specifically, I'll show you how to set up a new project. I'll explain the function of different parts of the screen of your NVivo workspace, as well as share some tips that will make the analysis easier for you later. And then I'll show you how to import your data into NVivo and then how to organize it into folders before you start the analysis. So I will not go through coding in this video. This is something I'll cover in the second video in this series. So without further ado, let's just start a new project in NVivo15. So this is the kind of a screen that you'll see when you first launch the software. This may differ slightly depending on the version that you're using. So as I said, this is generally very similar for all the different versions of NVivo. So don't worry if there is some minor difference maybe in color or in the content of these additional materials in different sections here. So in general, you don't have to worry about any of these things. If this is not your first project, you'll see a list of projects here in the recent projects tab. So if you've worked already on your project, if you already started, if you already imported some of the data, this is what you want to click. So just start, continue to work on this project. If this is a completely new project, then just click on new project and insert the project title. As you can see, you can set the location on your hard drive and also enter description, which is not something that you'll use, to be honest. So this is true for any descriptions in NVivo in general, whether it's a description of a code you're creating or a description of a project. It's kind of counterintuitive because to later access that description, you have to go to specific place, specific preferences, which is just not something you want to do. So don't worry about the description, click next. In general, it's set up the way you want it to be set up. So it's all good if you just create a new project. You do not want to auto-save the project because what this means is that you may sometimes find that if you did something that you don't want to do, maybe you deleted something by accident, then NVivo decides to auto-save, to save the project by itself. You definitely don't want that option, but what I usually do is I do want this to take place a little bit more often. So display save reminders every 10 minutes, which generally means that NVivo will remind you to save the project, which is something you do want to do because NVivo, as professional as it is, as good as it is for qualitative data analysis, it still tends to sometimes just crash on you, unfortunately, especially for on slower computers or on weaker devices. So you definitely want to be sure to save your project pretty often. So just create your new project, and that's how we get started. As you can see, there's a tour that you can take. It's optional, so I'll skip it for now. So let's just look at NVivo. So again, like I said, there are differences between different versions. Even within NVivo15, there are differences between different updates for NVivo15. But overall, this will always be the same. The whole layout will be the same. Do not panic if you see some minor differences, some differences in color. So what we'll do now, we'll just look around and I'll explain how to prepare for your analysis. As I said, I'll do coding in the next video, but here I just really want you to understand that it's not as intimidating, not as overwhelming as it may seem when you first launch this software. So let's just go through different parts of the screen. So I always start with the left hand side, the part that's blue at the moment in this version. Sometimes it can be purple or other shades of blue, but generally this part will always be there regardless of which version you're using. And this blue part is called navigation menu or navigation panel. So what's the function of the navigation panel? Here comes the first rule. So there are a couple of rules that I always teach when I talk about NVivo that are helpful and useful later. So just remember these rules and it will be a little bit easier. So this rule for this panel is that everything that you create in NVivo, everything that you bring into NVivo, into your project, or you create in your project will always be here, So this means if you import your data, it means it will be here somewhere. If you create a code, it will be here somewhere because you're creating these codes. Later, even if you create visualizations or queries and different comparisons and analysis or some charts, they also will always be here. Anything you create or bring into your project will always be here. This is not a place where you want to go if, for example, you want to conduct a query, you want to do a text search or something. This is not the place. This is where the results of that text search would be. So if you do want to look into different queries or things to do with your data, you can look at this menu at the top of the screen. So that's another menu. And as you can see, there is just about everything and anything in this menu. So like I said, the only thing you won't find in this menu at the top of the screen are the things that you create or bring into your project. You will never find your files, you'll never find your interviews or your codes here, but what you will find is a fairly standard, file section where you can save the project, copy project, which means basically making a backup, or leave the project completely. And then you have a whole bunch of things, importing your data. You can see, you can create and explore, which means creating codes, which is not what I do. This is not the menu that I use for creating codes, and I'll get to that shortly, but you can if you choose to. And then exploring the data, like text search queries and all sorts of queries. You don't have to worry about the modules and things like that, or sharing, because these are entirely optional, but just so you can find these things in that menu. But now let's get back for a second to our navigation menu, and this will help us understand the middle of the screen and what's happening here. So you can see there is some information about files and what files are. So generally NVivo will guide you through these things, but of course I'll do it as well, so it's a little bit easier. But the way it works is the navigation menu on the left is basically a list of folders, and once you click on a folder, you're taken to the contents of that folder, and here the contents are displayed in the middle of the screen. And the middle of the screen is called the list view because it lists what's in that folder. At the moment we are in the files folder, and if I close this information that explains what files are, we're looking at an empty folder basically. If we go to codes here, so again we will be creating codes later, if we go to codes and click on them, it explains what codes are, and then we close it. This is an empty list view. It lists the content of this folder, a folder that will contain our codes. So this is how it works. These are essentially folders. And now two more rules. So two more rules that will make it easier for you in NVivo. They're kind of related. The first rule is something I've kind of touched on already when I said that you can import your data from this top menu at the top of the screen, but this is not something that I do, or not something I choose to do. And this leads us to this rule. The rule is everything in NVivo can be done in several ways. Everything, just about every option, every function, everything can be done in several different ways, which is actually great because everyone will find a favorite way, the most convenient way for doing things, as you will see repeatedly as I guide you through NVivo. So that's one rule. Another rule, and this is a little bit of an overlapping and related rule, is that almost everything can be done by right-clicking. Right-clicking on different items, on different menus, different buttons, different sections of the screen. Whenever you right-click on something, so let me just right-click here, you can see there's a whole bunch of options that we can choose from, just because I right-clicked in this codes folder. So these options have to do with codes. If I right-click on any elements from our navigation menu, then again you can see that there's always a couple of things I can do. So if I right-click on codes, there's a couple of things I can do. So this rule is very useful because whenever you're not sure how to do something, but of course you know roughly what this something has to include or involve. So let's say I want to do something with the code that I have, but I'm not sure how. Always go for the right click first. So try right clicking and it will give you a whole bunch of relevant options. And this is very useful, and it really helps to guide you through the process in your project. And one final rule before we import our data is generally a rule, or maybe advice specifically: do not feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of different sections and buttons and icons here at the top. If you think about Microsoft Word or any other software that we all use, there is so many things that exist, but we don't really use them. Most people just use Microsoft Word for simple typing, but there's so many options that you can use if you know where to look for them, if you need them in the first place. So the same is true for NVivo. There's so many things. I've been using it for 9 years professionally, and most of these things I still just don't use, apart from training when I show how to use them. But in my analysis, I use a handful of options, and I'll guide you through these options in this video and the subsequent videos. But you don't have to worry about just all these other options. They just look overwhelming, but you'll just be using whatever you need to be using at a given moment. So now that we know roughly what the different parts of the screen are and how they work, we still are missing one important part of the screen, but this is because we haven't started to work on any details of any data or codes. But now what we want to do is to import our data. So you have your project, you have your data, you want to import it. As I said, you can go through the top menu that says import. It kind of seems to be the most logical and natural thing to do. Not sure why, but I'm really a big fan of right clicking in different parts of the screen. So I usually go through this files folder and I just open the files folder and then right click anywhere in the folder. So whether you do this or you go through the import at the top, it doesn't matter, but I'll go through import items, and that's what we need to import our text files. There are different, as you can see, there are different types of files. You can import surveys, you can import PDFs, which will also go through this import items option. Most of the things you can import will be import items. And now you just select your data. So you can see probably some familiar names. Let me just open and just click import. You do not need to create a case for these files. So cases is something you may have heard, but cases in NVivo and cases in research in real life are slightly different things. I will cover cases when time comes to cover cases. We don't need that for now, and even if we want to create cases, we can create them at any point. So just click import, and you can see now that we've imported our dataset. So this dataset is still loading, but you'll see it in a second. This dataset, you can see familiar names. There are celebrities, celebrity actors, celebrity chefs, just something I used for training. So now we can see again, if we go to codes folder, still empty. If we go to our data section, our files folder, now we have our files. So this is what we need, and this is what we'll be working on. So these are our interview transcripts. Before we open these files and conclude this video, before I show you how to code them in the next video, you can see that if you right click on any of these files, again, there is a whole bunch of options. You don't have to worry about these things. Again, this is quite overwhelming, but as I'll be repeating quite a lot throughout this training, just look for what you need at this moment in time. If I want to delete this file, just look for delete, and that's all I need. So do not let all these options overwhelm you. And also, before we decide to code this data, what if we want to group this data set? Maybe we want to put men and women in different groups, or maybe we want to put chefs and actors in different groups. This one is not a big deal because it's quite a small data set, but if you have a lot of different data, how to group it? So what we can do, the first thing, and what I would usually do, is to create folders for our data. And remember the rule about right-clicking. If I'm not sure how to create folders, but I know that it will be something about this files section, because remember, this is our folder containing our files, the first thing to do is to right-click on this section. So I'm right-clicking, creating a new folder, and I'll just create a folder for perhaps chefs. And then I'll right-click on this files folder again and create a folder for actors. So you can see our chefs and actors are still in this default location. So they are not here, they're in this files section. So we just take our actors. And as always, there are different ways to do it. The easiest way to do this is to just drag and drop. So you just click once, just hold the button and just drop them to the actors folder. So now they are in the actors folder. There's nobody in the chefs folder. So we go back, and this time, the other way to do it is just right click. Remember the rule about right clicking, cut them, and now go to the chefs folder, right click, and paste our data in the chefs folder. One important thing to point out about what I'm doing now is that I'm simply putting them into different folders. The fact that they are called actors and chefs doesn't mean anything to NVivo. It's just my way to visualize that data. So this is not for any comparisons or analysis. NVivo would still not recognize that they are actors or they're chefs or they're men and they're women if I create folders like that. So this is very important to know, because if you want to later, let's say, run some analysis based on these demographic differences, this is a completely different thing. And I'll show that in a video where I talk about matrix coding queries and I talk about attributes and values, because that's what you need to do. You need to assign attributes and values to your files to let NVivo know, so to speak, that they are actors and they are chefs. But what I'm doing now is not this option. I'm only creating these folders for myself, so I can call them whatever I want to call them, but this has no impact and no significant meaning or influence on any analytical steps, or certainly on how NVivo sees these files. And also another quick point, not something that people use often, so I won't really guide you through it, but feel free to ask questions if you do have questions about it. But if you decide that there are more ways in which you want to group and classify this data, and as a result, some files would be in different categories. So imagine we want to group this not only into chefs and actors, but also into men and women, which means that some of these people would be both in a folder with chefs in it and also in a folder with men or women in it. In fact, this would happen for every single person. If that's the case, do not ever do that through this folders option. You do not want to have a single file in more than one location. So Al Pacino stays in the actors. You don't want to create a men folder and also include Al Pacino there. What this would mean for NVivo is that you're essentially creating a new file. NVivo doesn't understand that. So you'd have two Al Pacino files, both of which have to be coded. It doesn't make any sense. If you really want to do that, if you really want to maybe for yourself create this visual representation of different groups, let's say people between 10 and 30, and also chefs and actors and men and women and maybe different other attributes, because it's very important for you to be visually, inspecting these different groups to which they belong. You would go through the sets option and specifically static sets option. So basically, static sets are like folders. They are like a visual representation of folders, because and it's very similar. You can create a new set. So let's say call it actors, and then a new set and call it men. And in case of static sets, you would then copy and paste these files into these sets, and it's totally fine if one file is in more than one set, because it still remains in just one folder, and this is crucial. So again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask me. I don't want to overcomplicate this video, because sets are not something that people usually like to use, but if you do, feel free to ask me questions. So now finally, just to conclude this video, we can open now one of these interviews. As always, you can do it in more than one way. You can just right click and find whatever you're looking for, as I said, so open document, or just double click, of course, on any of these documents. And what happens is that we're looking now at the contents of this document, and at the same time I just showed you the third view. So we have the navigation view, we have the list view, and now we have the what is called a detailed view, because it details the content of whatever we open from the list view. And this now is the most standard design of the workspace that you'll be using. So as you're working on your files in NVivo, almost at every time you'll have these three different windows. The navigation view is always there. The list view will either be your files or usually probably your codes, and then you'll have the content of what you're working on. If you can open any number of files at the same time, so you can see that they are listed here at the top. You can switch between them. You can close them, you can do anything you want with each file, but that's the most standard view before you go into coding, and this is something that I'll show you in the next video. So this is all for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you did. If you learned something new, share it with others if you know people who can benefit from it. Feel free to ask me questions in the comments and I'll answer these questions. And also remember that I offer a whole bunch of different services through my website, including one-to-one NVivo sessions, one-to-one NVivo workshops and tutorials, as well as a data analysis service where I analyze your data for you and write a report of the findings.